Welcome to the Peak Provider NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I have the honor of having the Chief Operating Officer and Company Secretary of Aruma, no less, on the line. Now, her name is Tiffany Roxburgh, like Edinburgh, Roxburgh, and Tiffany has been working in the organization for many years now, but she has a very interesting background, including both accountancy and mining. So I love kind of picking the brains of people that are working in the NDIS that have got these different types of backgrounds because it often brings a very unique perspective. So, Tiffany, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So let's zone in on this, okay? So you've got, with the mining background in particular, I would imagine that, I've not worked in that sector directly, but I'd imagine that safety is absolutely crucial. Having had a chat with your colleague before this recording, I learned about Aruma's project called Project Zero, which I believe is focusing on staff incidents. Now, having worked in the NDIS for many years now, I think that it's quite unfortunate, isn't it, that across the industry, sometimes support workers might almost expect sometimes to get injured. And it's not great that they have that expectation. It can make them maybe not feel safe to go to work. There's all the sort of implications of that. So could you just sort of unpack what is Project Zero all about? Because I'm fascinated to hear about this from, with your mining background and and what the project is in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you're right about the mining industry and safety being a number one priority. And it was actually quite interesting when I moved to the disability industry to see a very different culture in with respect to safety. It was almost not discussed, whereas in the mining industry, it's the opening of every meeting and the top priority for every organisation. Also learning that in the human services sector, it's one of the worst performing sectors according to Safe Work Australia. And that's really quite alarming that so many people are getting injured at work. But I guess when I reflect on the journey through the mining industry, mining wasn't always that best in class example of safety leadership. And if you reflect back to the 80s, there were significant injuries and fatalities on mine sites, and it took a real cultural shift at that point in time. And probably more than 20 years of hard leadership work to really shift the culture to get it where it is today. And I do see that same approach is, or similar, program of work really needs to be the focus of the disability industry and human services sector, so that we can really shift the dial on, the perception of safety and change that mindset from assuming it's part of the job to get injured at work to, really understanding that it's not okay for any worker to be injured.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing, because whenever one does a risk management plan, you've got the risk of something happening and then you've got the impact, right? So there can be something can be less likely or more likely to happen, but the impact could be low. But in disability, when we're talking about that, it could be exposure to violence. It could be exposure to people, it could be things like self-harm. You could be exposed to someone self-harming. You could be lots of worse things can happen as well, right? So that there's the kind of the psychological exposure. That's one thing. That's a huge impact that can lead to support workers, needing psychological assistance in forms of therapy afterwards. And of course, there's physical injury if someone might be, violent towards them, for example, for any reason. So, I guess my distinction is it's not just the risk that's there; it's literally the impact level is huge, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I guess the key focus areas for most disability service providers have been around, some of those physical injuries, so the physical impact of occupational violence, or the physical impact of manual handling injuries or slip, trips and falls, and they're generally the highest kind of category of incident. But what we're all learning, and it's broader across all of Australia, not just within the disability industry, is
Mm.
how important understanding the psychosocial risks of the situations that can unfold at work have on individuals. And there is new legislation out regarding psychosocial risk, and it absolutely is that emerging risk, and I say emerging in terms of people's understanding and awareness of the impact that those physical situations can have on people's mental health and well-being, and not just that of the people who have the physical injury, but of staff and participants who also are involved in those circumstances and situations that unfold.
It's a myriad of things, isn't it? So, I mean, for example, the term EAP, some people know what that is, some people don't. Employee assistance programs, right? That's going to be something that larger organizations have in place. If you're a business owner that, has that sort of perspective and attitude, then you may have already had that in your smaller business. But I think that it's probably fair to say that maybe a good portion of smaller providers might not even know what EAP is. So, like, could you maybe just speak to that and how that, can benefit people if they've been experienced to, for example, a psychosocial related injury?
Yeah, we certainly promote and encourage the employee assistance program at Aruma, and it's really quite well used and is such a valuable tool for staff to be able to access expert counsellors and support to help them debrief from those incidents. And we use EAP in a number of different ways at Aruma. So we will, if there is a significant incident that our staff are exposed to, we'll offer EAP support, providing them the number that they can call, and it is a free service for the employee, which is great. Sometimes we do find that people, having been through an experience, aren't always wanting to pick up the phone and make that phone call. So we also sometimes ask our employees whether they would like us to arrange an outbound call from EAP, obviously with their consent. And sometimes we find that that helps to people to kind of take that step to use that really valuable service. We also use the EAP in group settings too. So sometimes if an incident has occurred in one of our homes, it's really beneficial for the whole team to be able to come together and debrief that experience. And we get amazing feedback from those sessions that are organised, and how beneficial and helpful it is for our staff, and how much more connected they all are as a team following those sessions too. So I highly encourage any service provider that hasn't necessarily looked into the benefits of EAP to look into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are services that can be, through a partnership, basically outsourced, right? It does not necessarily mean that you have to employ a counselor, for example. I mean, it can be like, you sign up to the service. It's like signing up to something like EmploySure if you want to have, HR advice, or Legal Vision for legal advice. They're all great services that can be like a subscription style model for providers, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also that's the benefit of having it outsourced, is that it is confidential. Nothing gets reported back to the organisation about what people discuss, or in those sessions. It's entirely confidential, which is really valued as well by staff.
What's the interrelationship of work cover in that regard? Because I suppose, like, gosh, is it a fine line almost between the both, right? So you want to support your staff, and that's why you would have EAP. I suppose technically speaking, if you are injured at work, then it's also required that you report that, isn't it? And sometimes, that could lead to someone going onto a worker compensation situation, and sometimes it might not. So what's the kind of like, where are the boundaries, and what's the interrelationship between EAP and basically having, for example, your eye care worker comp cover?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. I've never kind of made that connection before myself, and maybe because we view them as really different kind of programs that are run, and our staff are entitled to access any and every support that they need in terms of injuries or incidents that might happen at work. So then they're definitely not connected in that way, that you need to lodge a workers' comp claim to be able to access
No.
the EAP.
Mm.
And I guess both avenues are there and available for staff as they need them. And We promote EAP to really be a wellbeing program as well. Our EAP provider also offers services outside of work-related matters that we encourage our staff to make use of those services too, so they can raise any personal or private related matter. Our EAP provider has experts in, addiction, finances. So, particularly in this environment with increasing interest rates and the impact that that has on people. So there's a number of very, non-work related supports that can be provided through that program, which is also another great benefit for people.
That's very holistic, and I love that group facilitated thing, because I think that could be quite relevant, especially in SIL houses, for example, right? Multitudes of staff have been around the incident, and it causes distress, for all people involved. I suppose of course, the other side of the very important side of the equation is the impact on participants, right? So, could you give a bit of insight as to, say, for example, of course, we're all familiar with things such as reportable incidents. So if you have a reportable incident, you are formally documenting, what are the recommended strategies and supports that you put in place as a result of that. So it could be, okay, we're going to book a session in with the psychologist, or we're going to book in a session with the GP. Could you just elaborate a bit more on, what's Aruma's point of view on that in terms of the types of supports that you immediately will offer to participants so that they can manage, through that process?
Yeah, and it varies for each participant or resident of our homes, and we will connect in with their support networks to make sure that their team of people who are relevant are able to support them. So whether that's family members, psychologists, GP, etc. Our staff are also really supportive in that approach of being able to use social stories and different tools and techniques. Not that they're professionals by any means, but just to help in that understanding of, and unpacking some of the situations have occurred. But it really does come down to what the participant has in their funding, for want of a better word, or their support network themselves, as to how easy it is to provide that much needed support for them. Some of our residents have, wonderful support networks that are, highly responsive, whereas other residents don't necessarily have those regular supports, and which can make it a little bit more challenging. There are a lot of great helplines out there and the like that we can also refer people to and assist them in accessing that. But one of the biggest challenges that exists in terms of accessing those, free help and counselling services for our participant base is we predominantly support people with an intellectual disability. There can be communication challenges that really limit the benefit that those services can provide. So one thing that we are exploring at Aruma is looking at, we have an employee assistance program. What does a customer assistance program look like? And how are we able to, fill some of that gap for our, participants who don't have that support network or have limited communication to be able to access those free supports? It's very much in its infancy, but it's certainly something we feel really passionate about, to make sure that everyone is able to access the supports that they need.
That's an intriguing model, isn't it? Because, say, for example, on the suite of therapy supports, whether it be psychiatry, psychology, all that type of stuff, if you needed that form of support after an incident, of course, different providers on that space can prioritize. If there's, something quite serious has happened, they can prioritize seeing someone. But wait lists and availability are very much a very real thing. So I think you're right. You kind of, it's the funding question, and it's also, do you have an existing relationship? Do you see your psychologist once a month already? Because if so, it will be a darn sight easier to get in. So I think, the customer assistance program concept's very intriguing. Yeah, on the last podcast that I did with the CEO of Next Group, we were talking about passionately about the idea of a national learning management system, and thinking about like why is it that you can't have recognition of prior learning as a support worker going from one place to another, and why can't we have, even if it's unaccredited learning, why can't we just have a common e-learning library of objects where we can say, yep, tick tick tick, you are now good for manual handling, you're good for this, etc. Like, it seems crazy to me that we don't have that. And the reason I mentioned that quick story is that your idea of a customer assistance program, gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do that nationally, at the federal level and not just at the individual provider level?
Oh, absolutely. And the great thing about safety is that we all have the same desired outcome. We all want to look after our staff, and we want to look after our the people that we support. And so the more that we can band together as an industry and work on these common challenges, the better it is for everyone. One thing that we have sort of really promoted through the Project Zero program that we started at Aruma is that concept of industry connectedness. And so Aruma is a member of the Alliance 20 or A20. And through that, we instigated a safety working group where we held a workshop with providers and really spoke openly and honestly and quite collaboratively around the challenges within the industry, and and from that has come a regular working group of the A20, which is looking at common objectives. So one place that we've started is developing a CEO charter, which is really looking at getting that commitment from the very top of the organisation around the importance of safety. But then other elements of what the working group is looking at is programs such as safety interaction programs, something that we can roll out across the whole industry, so that whether you work with Aruma or another provider, the way we talk about safety is consistent across the industry, and so it becomes part of just the way you do things if you work in the disability industry. So yeah, I think there is a lot of merit on a number of these great ideas that different organisations come up with on how we can work together through industry groups to help promote the benefit for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great to hear that through Alliance 20 you're doing such things, because I think that that's essentially the lobbying power, right? Like, yes, you've got the benefit of being the bigger organizations. You represent 10% of the entire market, so you've got the volume, you've got the ability, and yeah, you've got the clout really to kind of make recommendations to the agency. So I think that's powerful. Okay, look, now in terms of your particular leadership style, with your accountancy as well as mining background, can you tell us, being the COO, you're in charge of a lot of people, right? So like, how does your corporate for-profit world impact your leadership style, as COO?
Yeah, it's I don't know, I find those questions hard to answer because I just sort of do what I do, but it's a great question to make me kind of sit back and reflect on how I do what I do. And it is definitely challenging leading a large team. There's approximately 6,000 people within our organisation, and my leadership style is very much wanting to connect with people, and obviously that's not possible to do with 6,000 people on a regular basis. So yeah, I certainly like to spend my time focusing on communication in different forums. So through town halls and meetings, and bringing teams of people together to connect in terms of making good business decisions. But equally, I do spend a lot of my time traveling. So I will take a regional approach to traveling to meet and connect with people and visit our the homes and hubs where we operate, and really take a listening approach so that I can understand sort of what's working really well at our services, what's not working well, where the challenges are, and then bring that back to, help inform decisions that are made through the organisation. So I do, definitely like a very collaborative style. And it's interesting contrasting leadership in the for-profit industry to not-for-profit industry, and some of my sort of experience through that space. Certainly in for-profit and the mining industry, people understand the importance of profit. And in my former role as CFO at Aruma, when I started in the not-for-profit space, I was really actually quite taken back by the way people, the connection they had with the word profit. And, people were very negative about talking about profit. It was almost that the word profit is diametrically opposed to customer outcomes. And if you focus on profit, then people would assume that you don't care about the customers. And so that, I think that culture, probably is evident of, the block funding period. And there's been a real transition that's had to come into place with the rollout of the NDIS and understanding that more consumer-led approach to business. And so, just understanding how to kind of navigate through that to help people understand that actually being financially sustainable is a really important element of operating in the NDIS environment in the sector as a whole, and certainly something that still continues to challenge many, many service providers.
Absolutely. I founded a charity about, 10 years ago or something. And I always took the attitude of, I'm going to run it like a business, so to speak, in terms of the efficiencies and the returns on whatever activities we're going to do. I take the same belief that money is oxygen. So money is oxygen to get greater outcomes, better outcomes for your community of participants, right? You need that surplus or profit to do that, right? To do the fun stuff. If you've got a foundation or something that's associated to your main organization, well, gosh, you can only, make donations if you got money to donate, so it's quite important. And I think that, here would be a hypothetical example. If one is not for profit and you've got lots of accommodation going on, such as SIL, even if you don't own the houses, like, I think it's important not just to have solely, for example, a vacancy goal. You need to translate that into dollar goals for a sales team, because that when I do consultations, that's what I always focus on as well. I say, look, sales teams are sales teams, not for profit or not. They need a financial goal, right? What is that? What is the plan worth annually, 12 months, and how can they measure it? And they need to know exactly what your type of customers and who, what ratios are important. Like, they need objective goals in order to, succeed. So I think that sometimes my attitude is, similar to yours. It's absolutely fine to be a not-for-profit and to be for purpose, but it doesn't mean that we should let any inefficiencies or money's not a dirty word, basically. That's I see it as oxygen.
And it helps. It helps to deliver great outcomes for the people we support as well. Obviously, if you're not financially sustainable, you won't be there into the future to support people achieve their, purpose of living a great life. And so it is making that connection that actually everything does link back to customer outcomes. And I think, one of the other key importance and ways of sort of influencing people around understanding that, profit isn't a dirty word is when you think about the Disability Royal Commission and all of the recommendations that are coming out of that, there's a real shift that's going to need to occur in the industry over the next 10, 20 years. And it's going to take a lot of innovation from service providers and others across the industry. And so being able to generate a modest profit, which obviously in any not-for-profit goes back to the organisation and meeting its purpose, that's really important to make sure that we can continue to innovate into the future and, deliver better services, higher quality services, services that, are really led by what customers want and need.
Yeah, and I also think of Richard Branson. Like what was I need to paraphrase him. It's something like, treat people so well that they could leave at any time, but then they're treated so well that they don't want to leave. It's something like that, and I think they're saying, that analogy goes for like retention, right? If you've actually got surplus profit, etc., it means you can have an employee assistance program. Otherwise, you can't afford it. And if you want to keep good staff, then you want them to be happy in their career and their training opportunities, and and over time their remuneration as well, i.e. their salaries. Like, you've got to be able to afford these things. So yeah, it's absolutely crucial. Okay, so can you unpack it a little bit more? The 6,000 employees, it just fascinates me. Like, again, how you make it happen, right? Because I believe that it's approximately 5,500 or more frontline and managers of the frontline, and then roughly speaking 500 office management staff. Is that correct, roughly, in terms of the split?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Like, do you just have lots of generals and you go and hang out with the generals, basically?
Oh, too funny. I do have an amazing team. Like I do have, so I do, the way we structure our business is we do have an executive general manager of each of the different lines of businesses that I have, and I might be calling them generals moving forward. But
yes, ma'am.
yeah, we previously were organised based on geography, but now we're based on line of business. And the purpose of doing that is, with Aruma's background, we had a number of mergers and acquisitions over a very short period of time. We took on ex-New South Wales government services. House with No Steps at the time had merged with the Tipping Foundation down in Victoria. And then we had the transfer of Victorian government services too. So we found we had 4 very different cultures working within the organisation. People had different ways of doing things across, based on where they'd come from. And it was really hard to try to get that standardisation and one culture for the organisation. So we did restructure at a point in time away from geography to line of business to help us really focus in on our priorities of, delivering consistently high quality supports for the people we support. So we have a home and living line of business. We separately look at our community line of business. We have employment and then also children's services. And so each of those teams are structured, with sort of a clear management structure that suits those purposes. And and I guess it's that sort of, feed up and feed down communication through those channels to make an impact. But for me, like I said, I'm not the kind of leader that just wants to sit back in the office and, kind of get reports and give directions. I get so much more enjoyment out of being on the ground and meeting people and really understanding what makes Aruma tick and how, all the great feedback that people have around ways that we can continuously improve. At one point in time, when COVID first started, I decided that, watching all the aged care providers where executives had to, man the floor, and, I felt a real call to arms to undertake all of the training for a support worker so that in the event that we needed support in any of our homes, I could be available to go and assist and actually have that training behind me. I also undertook some buddy shifts as well through that program. So kind of, spent a day in the life of on the ground. And for me, those kind of experiences, like diving deeply into how work is done and seeing the reality of the day to day, is just essential for me to be able to feel like I'm making good decisions in terms of, leading the organisation forward. And it does take a lot of energy, I have to say, to travel and connecting with people. But I love it so much at the same time, and don't feel that I could do my job effectively without that element of kind of diving in and connecting with people.
Love that. Love that. That kind of that's fantastic. Yeah, because if you can, that means that the decisions you make are based in a genuine, grounded, boots on the ground context, literally. Out of interest, I've got an IT background, so I can't help myself. I'm a bit of a geek. Are there any particular systems that Aruma uses that in your role as COO, you're like, gosh, if we didn't have this, we couldn't live without it? Are there any particular ones that stand out for you?
Yeah, certainly our data analytics. So we use Power BI, and we're still on a journey with that, as many service providers are, in terms of having all your core systems working well to be able to generate the data that's of good quality to then come together into a tool like Power BI. But the progress we're making in that space and being able to use data as a really valuable source of kind of guiding you as to where you need to focus your time and energy and what's working well, where are the red flags,
Yep.
is absolutely, it's vital. And we've been putting a lot of work into that space, and certainly, moving to setting KPIs for our managers and making sure they're clearly understood and promoted through our, regular professional development discussions that we have with our staff is another critical way of sort of being able to manage the number of people in the team. And so having systems and tools to be able to, generate those KPIs to easily have those conversations is really valuable.
Absolutely. I passionately believe that there's a meeting point where KPIs and Power BI, like think about it like a dashboard of performance. Like if you're going to drive a car down the road, you need to know, is your engine running hot? You need to replace the oil, the water, all that kind of stuff. So it's very powerful, but there's a connection point, whereas there should be a synthesis of the KPIs that you've got individually, and how that manifests inside of the systems that you use. So if you use a CRM for sales and marketing, or a client management system for incident reports, whatever it is, I feel like those systems need to be built in a way that makes sense. They're intuitive. They competently work. There's not manual work, double ups, all that kind of stuff. They have to just work in a very well-oiled way. And if those things can literally directly mirror the types of KPIs you're trying to achieve and then feed towards the dashboard, that's the nirvana, isn't it? That's the mecca of having a dashboard as an exec team, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And, there's a lot of design and smarts that go into the back of making that happen. And, data architects, data engineers, all these roles that have been emerging as, everyone wants to be more data driven in their decision-making processes. And I think systems has been a real challenge for every service provider with the evolution of the NDIS, and being able to capture all that really critical data to be able to analyse and understand business performance is still an evolving landscape of being able to do that effectively in an NDIS environment. There's some great benchmarking work that is happening though, which is really helpful, I think, across the industry to then start to build the skills and expertise and understanding of, what are the KPIs that matter and how should you be managing your business.
Absolutely. And the layer down from the kind of the level we're talking at is exec team, dashboard, fantastic. That's brilliant to be there. But again, to make that happen for each of these areas of the business, like again, I do sales and marketing stuff, so I think about CRMs, right? I feel like you have to have a combination of what actually is relevant in the NDIS, what's best practice in a corporate kind of mindset to make sales and marketing happen. The industry, best practice, strategy, and then technical competency. right? Because it can't just be inside of a Word document that we go, oh, this is our strategy. The CRM in that example needs to reflect the fact that you've configured it that way, so it just flows, So yeah, it's about having people that know their stuff in each area, isn't it? Yeah. And then you feed that up, kind of thing. That's my distinction. Yeah. Forgive me, I'm very passionate. I told you, I warned you, I'm a geek.
I love systems too.
So let's talk a little bit about lived experience. And look, I'm a father of an NDIS participant. My son has autism. He's 7 years old. So like, as a dad, I get to have a perspective of being, shall we say, the customer, being his representative nominee, which gives me, an element of that sort of lived experience thing. In order to work in the NDIS at any level, how important do you think it is for the individual, professional, to have either lived experience themselves or some kind of direct connection to lived experience?
Yeah, I do think it's really important to have that deeper level of understanding of, what it's what it's like, what supports are needed, to really be connected in with that purpose of the organisation. For me, my experience is in relation to my father. He had motor neurons disease, and he's also the reason why I shifted my career from mining to disability services. What I saw with my father, we had no disability sort of exposure in my family prior to him getting diagnosed with MND. And most people listening will probably know motor neurons disease is a degenerative disease where capacity is lost over time. So he suffered with MND for 2 years, and during that time, as his ability to look after himself independently was declining, my mother and my family, were really well supported by the Motor Neurons Disease Association in New South Wales, and the support that they provided, and the expertise and understanding that they had that we knew nothing of was so valuable and appreciated by my family. And it just got me thinking that there's more to life than what I was doing at that point in time, and how important is it that there are organisations that can support with that level of expertise and really help guide individuals with a disability and their broader family and support networks through unknown uncharted waters and territory, as to what they'll need to be focusing on and experiencing. And I think just having that personal connection to the value that is derived when service providers get it right, and the joy that can bring to people. And I think it certainly helps with that alignment to the purpose of an organisation, and making sure that everyone's really focused on what matters most, and making sure that we deliver a quality service every time. And and I think people can get that connection in other ways, such as doing things like I was talking about with, buddy shifts and putting yourself, experiencing what it's like. But I certainly think for me, my absolute driver of my passion is that experience that I had within my family.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there's a potency and a very meaningful connection when it's personal. And it is a very common story. I got into disability because family member, right? So, and I do also very much agree with your point of it can happen through training and almost osmosis of being around the sector. If it is the osmosis version, I do think that it's crucial for providers to really, select and pick staff that have got that coachability to really truly appreciate what it means, and to have that emotional intelligence and nuance. Because if you don't have the direct personal connection, then yeah, I think you need to be the right personality type to kind of take it on. You can't see it as just a job. It's not just a job. It's more than that, isn't
Absolutely
it?
not.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and we recruit strongly through values, to try
yeah.
to identify those people. I think, we all know it does take a special type of
Mm-hmm.
person to be able to, you know, be an excellent support worker or
Mm-hmm.
manager in this industry. And yeah, and we find, really focusing on values through that recruitment process helps us to find, the right staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the answer on that. Now, in terms of the outcomes of the Royal Commission into violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of people with disability, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on, what's your perspective of all of that?
Yeah, it's certainly, yeah, there's been a massive investment from the Australian public over the last 4 years, and it's great to finally have the recommendations out for everyone to consider. And I think. I wouldn't say there was anything surprising in the recommendations that came through at Aruma. We obviously, like every other service provider, followed the hearings and sort of the progress of the Royal Commission, reviewed issues papers and the like. So it is great that the recommendations are out there, and it's also great timing as well with the review of the NDIS that Bill
Mm-hmm.
Shorten's undertaking, with those findings coming out later in this month as well,
Yes.
to be a real catalyst for change in the industry. And I guess what we still need to be patient for is understanding, which of the recommendations will government choose to implement, and
Yes.
some of the detail behind how that's going to happen. As I mentioned, we've been following really closely over the duration of the Royal Commission,
Mm-hmm.
and taking the cues of what's being discussed, and where we think those recommendations might fall. And some of the things that we're really focused on through those recommendations are thinking about how can we build those into our strategies moving forward. Some of the key areas are around, thinking about how do we bolster the autonomy of people
Mm-hmm.
with a disability through the services that we provide, but more importantly, our practice as to making sure that we truly enable autonomy, from that practice perspective. Um, complaints handling has been a key focus, and introducing that element of redress that we saw through the Child Sexual Abuse Royal Commission as well. And obviously, there's no details around what that will look like moving forward, but as the NDISC, unpacks that, we're certainly reflecting on that in our organisation as well.
Mm-hmm.
But probably one of the biggest areas for us is recommendations around, group homes being phased out. And, that's certainly not a surprise, because we've seen that through issues papers, and been expecting that as a natural progression away from group homes. And we've been working on that for a number of years, and particularly in our ex-government transferred services. So I mentioned
Yep.
we took on board some of those services, and what we probably all know is that as people with a disability were moved from big institutions into group homes,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have the ability to choose who they lived with. And so we've been really focused on understanding our customers,
Mm-hmm.
whether they like living where they're living, whether they like who they're living with, and really helping. We use the word reconfigure, but
Mm-hmm.
moving customers to accommodation and to live with people who best, who they want to live with. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that as a progression of work is, for Aruma it's underway, but for across the industry, it's something that's going to take many years.
Mm-hmm.
and excitingly, there'll be all sorts of new models that come out of that as well to, support people to live independently.
Absolutely. And I love the direction of that in terms of the, move away from that. Here's the $1 million question though. If you've got anything less than 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, right? You've got 1-to-2, 1-to-3, 1-to-4. How do you move away from it? How do you logistically make that happen if there's not funding? Like I know I've seen models, for example, of concierge style apartment style buildings where you can have apartment, one support worker goes between them. I think it's great. Many providers are leading the way on just doing that. I think that's lovely. But that only works if the support needs, accommodate for that basically. Like the support worker that say, allocated to 3 participants, they very much might need to be in the actual physical proximity of all 3 at the same time to support them. So like, gosh, any thoughts on that? Like what do you reckon the impact's going to be there? It's like, okay, move away from group homes, but what about the support ratios and the funding?
Yeah, and the overall financial viability of the scheme is, the ultimate question. And I think, it's about trying to marry up all those different components to get to what is a good outcome for the individual in a financially sustainable way. We find like there's no one model that's going to suit everyone. And sometimes people want to live together, and that's okay. Like that's totally fine. And and in those environments, if there's 3 people living together, they choose to live together. Like we've got some great success stories of young men kind of meeting each other and becoming really great mates, and and then deciding to move in and share a home together. So there is that whole, what is this stage of life? What are your objectives? And making sure that the models sort of can adapt to the different stages of life that people are in and their different, wants and needs. It's certainly not an easy question that you're asking, though, in terms of, what if everyone decided they wanted to live alone and needed one-to-one support, and what does that mean? I just don't think we'll find ourselves in that drastic situation, because humans are social in nature, and that ability to live with other people that are your friends, and also the informal supports that are also being explored through the NDIA around I guess it's almost unfunded supports of people with a disability living with friends and other able-bodied people that can provide informally some of those supports too. And I think no one, I imagine, has the answer as to how is it all going to work moving forward. But it's those kind of innovations and, working on different models and seeing how it can operate that's, going to help us get to meeting all of those challenges and outcomes.
Absolutely. I think the individualized living options, the ILO model as well, is something to watch this space on. And I think people will increasingly get a bit more familiar with it, because I think it's fair to say that a lot of providers don't really understand, what ILO actually is and what does it mean, etc. So, totally agree. It's going to be a shifting landscape. I think that the NDIS is almost like the housing market and the RBA. We need to have forward guidance as much as possible, because it is a marketplace. There are commercial and operational impacts. People need to be able to plan, don't they? Look, hats off to Bill Shorten. He's doing a great job, I think, about, all those types of things. So, look, this has been fascinating. I've loved this conversation. I wish we had more time. But Tiffany, for any kind of smaller providers out there, wanting to scale, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What would be your one pearl of wisdom you'd say for the smaller people that are, scaling? They're just starting out. They're at the first 1 million or 2 million. With your kind of COO hat, what would be your pearl of wisdom that you'd give to those types of providers?
Probably the key to success is always going to be around delivering a really high quality service that your customers love you for. And with that will come, word of mouth growth, and you know, definitely as you try to grow, making that economies of scale as well in the way you structure your organisation is critical too.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. And then it's good to have that clear focal point, because otherwise we can go off down the wrong rabbit hole, so to speak. Focus on that, and the right systems, the right people will come because you're focusing on service.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Tiffany Roxburgh from Aruma, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. My name is Chris Hall. This is the Peak Provider NDIS podcast, and if you're interested in scaling your business, please check out peakprovider.com.au for a series of sales and marketing services and events. Tiffany, thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Chris.
All the best.